You mentioned on Lex Friedman that if you look at civilization, half of the problems are due to the fact that our understanding of money and economics is defective. What do you mean by that? And what is the common and incorrect perspective versus the uncommon and correct perspective?
The common perspective is to think that money is the currency that the government gives you, and that the economic policies of the government are for the good, are for your own good, and you'll benefit by complying with them or accepting them. And that most conventional economic principles and conventional economic education is useful, or that conventional economic figures are valid. Economics, as we enter the 21st century, really is a pseudoscience. And I would argue that before Bitcoin, all economics was an art. It was somewhere between art, pseudoscience, and religion and philosophy, and political science. And it wasn't a scientific discipline or an engineering discipline. I'm not even sure the economists would disagree over that, by the way. So we lived in a world where human race never had perfected money. We never engineered money. And in the absence of perfected money, you can't have economics as an engineering discipline. And that means that all of the political policies and political economic wisdom generally is subject to debate, and there is no right and wrong. So people capriciously do what they want to do, and they generate facts and metrics to support whatever they want to do. It's kind of a religious pseudoscience, and it's not rigorous engineering. It's not anchored in mathematics, scientific discipline, and you can't characterize it as an engineering discipline. Now, let me go back to the question of what is money. Fundamentally, people think currency is money, but really the academic definition of what is money is medium of exchange, a unit of account, a store of value. What is it really? Well, money is just, the most tradable good, the most durable, tradable element or unit of something that we can trade for something else of value. So in the history of the world, you go back 10,000 years, people might have traded seashells, or they traded stone coins or polished glass beads, or they might have traded arrowheads. What is the universal commodity that we know people will accept? And we use it to create a market economy, to solve the problem of coincidence of wants, right? Everybody produces something different. And you need to, and if you have stone axes and I have food, and I want the stone axe and you want the food, we trade for some ratio. But if everybody doesn't have exactly what everybody else needs, that barter economy breaks down. It gets too complicated. So we know that there have been sophisticated economies for 1,000,000 years. You can find stone axe factories that go back 1,000,000 years. The issue really is, how do you make those economies work? Through a process of trial and error, people eventually arrived at metals, copper coins, silver coins, then gold coins, and they worked with some kind of metallic unit of account and type of money. But even in modern era, you could see people use bales of tobacco as money in the colonies before the Revolutionary War. In prisons, people use cigarettes as money, and POWs use cigarettes as money. What's the problem? The problem is, in the modern era, we use fiat currency as money for the most part. And is it a medium exchange? Sure it is. Is it a unit of account? Sometimes. Is it a store of value? It's a store of value with a half-life of some amount. So what's the half-life of the money? How long does it take for the money to lose half its economic energy? Well, that's what we'll call the inflation rate. But the problem is, the actual monetary inflation rate isn't reported. Nobody tracks it. So if you actually have $1 million of capital and you invest it in the dollar and you hold it there for 100 years, the dollar supply increases 7% a year on average over 100 years, which means that your capital loses half its value every 10 years. And over the course of 100 years, you're cut in half 10 times, which means that you start with $1 million and you end up losing 99.9% of the $1 million. It gets worse if it's in a weak currency like the peso. In that case, you'd lose 99.9% of your capital in 20 years. So what is capital? Economic energy, purchasing power. Most of the time when people think about money, they think about currency, but currency is an awful way to store your economic energy. So you can't really hold money very long. And then when they think about the inflation rate, they always focus upon the CPI, Consumer Price Index. That's just it's just a manufactured synthetic metric. And what is it? The establishment would have you believe that CPI is the rate at which consumer prices increase, and that's what you ought to be concerned about. Neither of those statements are necessarily true. Those premises are wrong. It's not the rate at which consumer prices go up, and it's not the rate you should be concerned about. It's simply the rate at which a arbitrary basket of goods defined by an economist goes up in price in a certain place. So if I define a basket of goods in Kansas and I track the price of them, then I've got a CPI for people that live in Kansas that live solely on that basket of goods. But even that's not quite true, because once I define that methodology, there's something called hedonic adjustments, which means every year or every few years or every 10 years, I can just arbitrarily take things out of the basket. Late one economist took coffee out of a basket. But for example, if I define a market basket of goods and that includes one concert every 2 months for the average person, and concerts go from $10 to $500, I could just take the concert out of the basket and I could say, well, in the modern era, people can watch Taylor Swift on Netflix and that's free. So instead of giving you 6 concerts a year that cost $3,000 a year that looks like inflation, I mean, how's the average person spend $3,000 a year on? It'd be more than that after you add the merch and whatever. Okay, $5,000 a year on concerts. It used to cost $100, now it costs $5,000. That's inflation. But if I just rotate that into Netflix Taylor Swift concert, not only do I not notice that everything went up to $5,000 a year, I actually announced gleefully that the cost went down to go to concerts now. So conventional wisdom is people accept the conventional definition of money. They accept a certain asset as money that's not really money. And then they accept, conventional definitions of inflation as being relevant and proper, which is neither. And then that causes them to make a whole host of mistakes, like, I'm going to give you 4% interest in your bank account. The CPI is only 2%, or our target is 2%. If you're getting 4%, then you're staying ahead of inflation. Well, what if the real monetary expansion rate is 12% and I'm giving you 4% or 3% after tax? Well, you're actually losing 9% of your wealth every year.